First, let me say that my heart hurts for the terrible events that happened at Perry High School. I know families and the community is devastated. I know they're trying to learn from this and trying to figure out how to move forward. But in a way, I think all of us do that because we are parents, grandparents, uncles, aunts, friends who love family, children, and our country. As the world, people, and ideas change, there's one thing that we all need to strive to preserve and protect, and that is our freedom, especially our Second Amendment rights. Without them, we are simply a subject for the government, and we will become victims of evil on a massive scale. I tell you so from experience. I was born and raised in Venezuela, a country blessed by Mother Nature with beautiful land, but condemned by leaders who little by little took away people's rights. As you know, Venezuela is in deep trouble. You will hear from the mainstream media that the problems or the root causes of Venezuelans' problems are external. There's always something else that causes problems in our countries. But the reality is that the problem is a lot more deeper than the Venezuelan government and even American politicians claim. The hard truth is that many Venezuelans, including the president, were active participants in the downfall of the country. Hugo Chávez, the president who was president in 1998, was a Venezuelan. I saw him walk the streets of Caracas, pointing out at businesses and telling them, expropriate that business, expropriate that business. He politicized the military, which became corrupt and partisan. And like that, many opportunist government officials robbed millions of dollars to enrich themselves. Chavez gave millions of dollars to Cuba and oil, to Cuba, Ecuador, Argentina, Nicaragua, to name a few, while Venezuelans suffered in misery. But again, it is easier to blame others and the leaders for one's misfortune. Sadly, many, not all, but many citizens also contributed to the country's ruination. They hated neighbors, family members, and friends who had different political views, preventing the free exchange of ideas and destroying families and long-lasting friendships. Let me tell you that hate does not discriminate. Hate will blind the most educated and the so-called intellectuals. Many subscribe to the idea that successful people and businesses were the problem, destroying industries and increasing unemployment. I couldn't understand why people agree to let the government limit their potentials, restricting their levels of success. Venezuelans accepted Hugo Chávez's constitutional changes that ultimately consolidated his presidential powers, despite vowing to only govern for the people. But there is a famous interview with Jorge Ramos in which Chávez lied by saying he would not stay in power longer than he had to, which he did, would not nationalize any business, which he did, and would never take control of any news network, which he also did. Now, the current government, the current president, who is worse than Chávez, enjoys all the powers that Venezuelans gave to the government. We must keep the government with limited powers. Venezuela slowly accepted gun control because that was the only solution the government provided. High-profile personalities, actors, musicians, they were part of the campaign to disarm the population. Ironically, they were the elitists who enjoyed armed bodyguards. Does that sound familiar? Chávez's gun control agenda was slow but effective. From the moment he took power in 1999. I remember it was difficult to find 22 caliber ammunition and pellets I needed as an Olympic shooter so I could compete and train. Gun control destroyed the industry. The government imposed severe regulations on gun stores because they go for the industry. That's your gateway to get firearms. And prohibited the importation of firearms. It has slowly destroyed the firearms industry in Venezuela, making it very difficult for average Venezuelans to purchase guns and obtain concealed carry licenses. Well, we in Venezuela never had a Second Amendment right. That was not a right in Venezuela like we had in the United States. It was a privilege that many Venezuelans exercised to go hunting, to go target shooting, or for self-defense. And that is how I became a young competitive shooter and later became an Olympian at the age of 19 when I participated at the Sydney Olympics in 2000, being the first Venezuelan female shooter who represented the country at an Olympics. You know, gun control worked. It worked in preventing law-abiding citizens from owning and getting firearms, favoring criminals and the oppressive government. Not surprisingly, the crime increased at elevated rates during Chávez's regime. Statistics showed that the homicide rate in 1998, right when he was elected, was 19 per 100,000. By 2013, the rate had risen to 79 homicides per 100,000. But of course, the government didn't blame themselves for such a failure, or the underfunded police force, or keeping citizens unarmed. As expected, people got desperate. And in 2011, thousands of Venezuelan students marched in the streets demanding increased gun control because that's all they knew, that's all they heard. Take the guns away and we control violence. They wanted a total disarmament of the population. Now, it's essential to know that by this time, gun stores were almost non-existent. It was practically impossible for citizens to own and have firearms or have a concealed carry license. Yet crime was rampant. But these young students followed what they felt was a noble cause. They thought that banning guns would prevent gun violence. And perhaps only the government should have guns, right? Politicians from both sides agreed that disarmament was the right path moving forward. In 2012, they passed a law that prohibited the private, complete sale of firearms. Today we know how that story ends, or I should say continues. The British government lists Venezuela as having some of the highest murder rates in the world. I quote from their gov.uk official page that says, robbery, mugging, carjacking, and burglary are all very common and often accompanied by extreme violence. That is the reality of Venezuelans under gun control. But Venezuelans have fought back. But it's not much you can do with rocks against tanks and armed forces controlled by the government, like it happened in 2017, when it was the same young people who went on the streets to protest for a change so they could have a better future. Many were killed, tortured, and jailed. Yes, they fought back, but it was late. It is common among Venezuelans to say that we didn't know how good we had it. In Venezuela, we relinquished our power, our voice, our way to defend ourselves. And for what? And why? That's a question I imagine haunts a lot of people who, like me, have seen their countries ruined. But deep inside, we know what happened. And we know the answers to those questions. We know that our countries were destroyed by failed socialist ideologies and politicians who speak the right words to lie and hide the truth to get your approval. Let me illustrate this with a portion of a historical speech. Weapons for what? Is there a dictatorship here? Are you going to fight against the free government that respects the rights of the people? Now there is no censorship and that the press is entirely free. Today, when there is no torture, no political prisoners, no murder, no terror. Today, when there is nothing but joy, when all the rights of the citizens have been restored, when elections are going to be called in the shortest possible time, weapons for what? Weapons for what? Well, this is part of Fidel Castro's speech in January 8, 1959 in Havana, Cuba, after defeating General Fulgencio Batista. His words didn't age well, did they? History repeats itself, now in the greatest nation that ever existed. That is our reality. In Joe Biden's words, which he has repeatedly said, America is at an inflection point. And I believe him, because this administration leads a strong movement that wants Americans to be more socialists, more dependent, and disarmed, or should I say, controlled. And while many used to tell me years ago, oh Gabby, this will never happen in America, we're not like Venezuela. Let me tell you what Venezuelans told Cubans. This will never happen in Venezuela because we're not an island. The truth is that people fail to recognize that personalities and events don't have to be the same to get similar results. We must identify enough similarities to know that our country is going on the wrong direction, like the unapologetic and shameless attack on citizen rights in the name of the common good. Perfect example are gun control advocates and politicians who constantly attack our Second Amendment rights. Let me illustrate how the arguments of gun control advocates and politicians do not make sense. They hide the truth to earn your approval. One, they claim the problem is AR-15s, or so they call it, assault rifles. However, AR-15s are the least commonly used firearm in homicides. So why do they want to ban it? They want to ban it because looking like a military weapon is their best argument to ban firearms at a massive scale. But don't fool yourself believing the only thing they want is rifles. The gun control agenda is a slow and meticulous process that goes beyond banning rifles. Disarmament is always the ultimate goal. They want to raise the age for owning rifles from 18 to 21 to prevent young people from committing heinous crimes. However, according to data shared by the New York Times, in the last 5 decades, 50 years, where 4 or more people were killed, only 4 women were the perpetrators. In 5 decades, only 4 women were the perpetrators. Then why do young women have to pay the price and not being able to obtain a firearm? Please, someone call the feminists. I guess we need them. Why do young women who are not 21 and yet cannot get a handgun to protect themselves are being restricted to owning a rifle? To reduce gun crimes? The numbers don't add up. Ladies, gun control politicians want to limit your rights because they cannot make a classification based on gender. So they choose to stomp on your God-given right to own and bear arms. Now let me address the young women who proudly say or call for gun control and think they're part of a noble cause to control crime. You are being manipulated. You alone become an active participant in the infringement of your constitutional rights. You cannot blame control advocates when it was you who voluntarily rescinded the only chance you have to obtain the most effective tool to protect and defend your life. Fellow Americans, we live in the best country in the world with freedoms that people around the world wish they had. Our founding fathers were wise enough to understand human behavior, and while there is always the risk that some use our rights to harm others, it is never enough reason to deny such rights to the citizens. As a Venezuelan, I tell you not to let your emotions make the terrible mistake to renounce your rights because it seems right. It never is. As an American, I tell you to stay strong, to protect our nation, our Constitution, and our values. The world is filled with people who profess having good intentions when promoting fundamental changes to our country and our lives. But be alert, or one day you will look around wondering what happened to your community and your country. Your rights will be stripped away, as it happened many times around the world, and you will be too distracted to notice. History has taught us that we should only trust those who are willing to preserve and protect our rights. I speak today in the name of freedom, which are protected by our Constitution. So I tell you, do not lower your guard. Keep protecting our rights by educating your children and about the importance of our Constitution and the terrible consequences if it is weakened. Invite others to gun clubs. Be safe, be a responsible gun owner, and teach those who take for granted our Second Amendment rights why we all need to protect it. Because they also vote. It is everyone's responsibility to keep our country together and strive for individual success. And it doesn't matter if those against us use rockets of hate and despair, you must always show that your beliefs and the respect for our country is still here. I was not born in America, but I love it. With all my heart. It is here where I saw endless possibilities, even through hardship and hitting rock bottom. America and its freedoms are worth fighting for. And like I say in my naturalization ceremony, almost 14 years ago, I declare on oath that I will support and defend the Constitution and laws of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. God bless you, and God bless the United States of America.